Hello Yu-Gi-Oh players and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the Yugioh. So today I want to start a little bit of a discussion on Chain Beat. Actually, considering my history with this deck and how much I like it, I think it's going to end up being quite a long and extended set of discussions on the deck, since I don't think that like one 8-minute video can do justice to this deck, considering that I made a deck review on Chain Beat before in the past. But, you know, I don't think it was long enough to give you guys really an idea of how great this deck is, how much fun it is, how much you can do with it, and really get into all the mastery that I have achieved of this deck over the months and months that I have been working through it. What I mean by that is, as many of you guys know, since about February, I have been I've been like perfecting and tweaking this deck to bring it to my Seattle Regionals, which is going to be this Saturday. However, Hidden Arsenal 7 got set back so that I won't be able to use some of the most important cards for the deck until after the regional, which kind of bummed me out. But what it means is I can actually impart the knowledge that I have gained of this deck over the months onto you guys without the threat of people knowing exactly how I use the deck that I am bringing to regionals. Not that that's a big issue or anything, but I didn't really want to run that risk. But now what I get to do is use all that energy that I would have used into putting this deck into a regional, into imparting my wisdom onto you guys. Now this deck, like a lot of channels, have the deck that becomes their project deck and their discussion deck. They just keep uploading more and more videos on, and they keep updating it, and they keep discussing it. This is probably going to end up being that deck for me. So in this video, I want to make it a little bit quick because I don't have a whole lot of time for uploading tonight. So I want to just kind of introduce you guys to Chain Beat. If you've seen my deck review, I'm going to go a little bit more in-depth into it. But if you have no idea what Chain Beat is, then you are part of a pretty massive club around the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. So Chain Beat is a stun variant deck that kind of came out of left field from the OCG. I believe it won one kind of regionally event there. But it did a little bit for a little while, but then they got Lord of Tachyon Galaxy, and it kind of dropped off the face of the earth. But what the deck basically is a stun variant deck that uses field dodger monsters. Now, a lot of people call these cards floaters, and while they technically are floaters, since you do not risk anything by putting them on the board, since they're extremely difficult to get rid of, they aren't the kind of really classic floaters that just replace themselves in value when you put them on the board. So I just don't really call those in a few variants of Chain Beat. You do use classic floaters, but I digress. That is a discussion for another video. So what Chain Beat does is it uses dodgy monsters, like monsters that dodge the field, and a multitude of chainable traps to whittle away your opponent's resources until you can hit them with a mass field clearing, and then make a big push with your monsters. Now, that's pretty much how the deck works. It's just a lot of chainable traps and a lot of chainable monsters. Now, there are a few cards that you are almost always going to see in a Chain Beat deck. The deck has been changed quite a bit by the format change, pretty much because Zen Mighty got banned. Because the main card, the card that you're going to see in every Chain Beat deck, is Wind-Up Rabbit. Wind-Up Rabbit is the quintessential field dodgy floater guy. His ability allows him to dodge around every time you attack, every time you activate a monster effect. You know, anytime except the damage step, you can zip this guy off the field and protect him, which is very helpful for this deck for a few reasons. Mainly, it just keeps itself from being killed, which means you always have field presence. I'll talk about it later. Another advantage to it is it's searchable by Tenki. The next card is the newer edition. The reason why I couldn't use it for my regional coming up on Saturday is Verse Thunderbird, or Evil Swarm Thunderbird. Now, Thunderbird is kind of the bigger, faster, and less sensitive version of Wind-Up Rabbit. Now, Verse Thunderbird is very good. It's debatable whether it's better than Wind-Up Rabbit simply because it's less sensitive. Where Wind-Up Rabbit can dodge any time during either player's turn, Evil Swarm Thunderbird can only dodge when a card effect is activated, which means that if an opposing monster attacks and they don't activate an effect, Thunderbird dies. But that's part of a lot of the rest of the deck. But Thunderbird has the advantage of having 1950 attack after coming back from its dodge, which it can do during the next standby phase, as opposed to your next standby phase like Rabbit does. So if your opponent tries to bottomless this, it just comes back during their standby phase with 1950 attack. So Thunderbird is very good, and the only reasons why it isn't better than Wind Up Rabbit is just because it's less sensitive, it's easier to kill, and it isn't searchable by Tenki. Now, a lot of players use Winged Rhinos, which is absolutely cool. I don't have an issue with Winged Rhinos in and of itself. However, in my opinion, it's totally outclassed by Thunderbird. I wouldn't use it in the deck. I think that the deck isn't optimal with Winged Rhinos instead of Thunderbird, which is why I'm not going to bring a Winged Rhinos version to regionals. Solely because although Winged Rhinos can be searched by Tenki, it's pretty much outclassed by Thunderbird. It doesn't come back during your opponent's turn. It's weaker after its dodge than Thunderbird is. It uses up a normal summon. It's just Thunderbird is better than it in pretty much every way. So although Winged Rhinos is usable, you're not going to see it much after Thunderbird comes out. Now the rest of the cards are pretty much trap cards. Now, like I said before, the deck uses a lot of chainable trap cards in order to make sure that you can get your Thunderbird's effect. And so even if your opponent uses things like MST or Heavy, you're always going to get cards off. So the first card is kind of the quintessential chainable trap, Compulsory Escape or Evacuation Device. Sorry, I just kind of gave away the other one. Now, Compulsory Evacuation Device, it's very good against Synchros in Ixies. The other advantage to it is if your opponent like MSTs it before they can summon a monster, if you have your Thunderbird on the board, or even if your opponent has a monster, you can just activate it and target your opponent's monster or your Thunderbird after they MST it. You can dodge your Thunderbird, it's protected for a turn, and you haven't lost anything off of that dodge. So Compulsory Evacuation Device is very good. However, it isn't even the best chainable trap card in the deck, and it isn't even the most important one. The most important chainable trap card in the deck is Compulsory Escape Device. Now, this is a card that has been widely considered to be an absolutely terrible card because it requires you to shuffle one of your own monsters back into your deck as well as one of your opponent's monsters into your deck, or into their deck. So you have to, instead of putting in the graveyard at least where you can have more access to it, now it's in the deck and you have to research for it. But in this case, in this deck, now this is a weird ruling and it hasn't been repealed yet, but it's an old OCG ruling, so I'm not sure if it's actually valid in the TCG right now, is that this card only has to have a monster on your side of the field in order to activate, not to resolve, which means that you can activate this guy, you can dodge all your Thunderbirds and Rabbits, and then your opponent only has to shuffle a card into their deck, not you. So this is really great for spot removal. It's especially good against Evil Swarm, I'm finding, because they can summon that caster, and you're like, hell nah, you flip that caster back into their deck, and they don't get their normal summon that turn. And like if they summon Rabbit, you can just flip that Rabbit back into the deck and they have to wait for it for later. There are just tons of things that you can use with this card in this deck. And once again, it's chainable, so if your opponent MSTs it, you can activate it. And if your opponent attacks, your Thunderbird, you can activate this card in order to chain the Thunderbird's effect. There are just tons of fun things. Now, the final card you're going to see in pretty much every Chain Beat deck is Torrential Tribute. This is your big field clearing card. After you've whittled down your opponent's resources, this is the card you want to have sitting left over. Because when they make their last resort play, they put a couple of monsters on the board, you flip this card, they've run totally out of options, and you're left with a 1950 attacker. Probably more cards than that, but you also got your Wind-Up Rabbits. So there are tons of things you can do after that. I mean, really, you just have to push, but this Torrential Tribute is your biggest power card. Now, there are other cards that you're almost always going to see in these decks, except they aren't quite as common as these ones. I think I'll discuss those in a later video. I think I'm going to make a few videos this week, one talking about the different variants of Chain Beat, and another one talking about tech cards that you can use and different cards that you can use in the deck, and finally one just talking about the playstyle of the deck. It's a very fun playstyle, it's very difficult, and it's very engaging. So if you guys are interested in chain beat, I'd absolutely stick around. If you haven't subscribed already, you should subscribe. But I think I'm going to cut this video short right now just because I don't have a whole lot of time tonight. And I hope that you guys are interested in this deck discussion. Absolutely give it a thumbs up if you want to see more. But until then, I got a jet. See you guys later.